All right, I want to go over the homework for this week 5 we're in right now, chapter 5 in the textbook. We're going to look at costs. Before we've looked at total revenue, looking at elasticity. Now we're going to take a look at total revenue compared to total costs and see if a firm is profitable, what quantity to sell at, how much do we each produce to be the most profitable. It's one of the key parts for this next test we're going to have in a bunch of weeks. So this is a good spreadsheet to look at before the test. So here with this scenario here, we got output in column A. 0 units sold, 1 unit sold. In the textbook, I'm taking these numbers from the textbook. It talks about lumber units. Creating a bunch of pine lumber. 1 unit, the second unit, the third unit. So these different outputs that we could do, and then how much it costs to create these things. So you get fixed costs. Fixed cost. Take a look at the textbook. It's fairly straightforward. Costs that don't change with output. So what you pay in rent for your factory doesn't change on how much you produce, right? It's the same every month. And variable costs are like materials that go into creating this lumber organ. Same thing if you're doing shirts. How much cloth do you have to buy? How much yarn do you have to buy to create these things? So it's depending on how much you produce, right? The variable costs. And these are numbers that are just given, right? We're going to do a lot of formulas for everything else. So we got our cost generally are separated into fixed and variable costs. Very important, as we'll see later. So total costs, again, quick formula. It's going to be my variable cost, 0 for this first one, because if we produce nothing, there's no variable cost. Plus, if I can get it right, the total fixed cost, right? C3 plus B3. 200, and then if I want to copy it all the way down, I just go to the corner, right? Get the handler there, just double click, copies it all the way down. So I'm going to check at number 5 just to make sure. I double click here. Yeah, it's taking this 200 for the fixed cost for the fifth plus the variable costs, the 1,100. Never hurts to check, and just a quick escape gets out. So let's see the average fixed cost, right? What's the average per unit sold? So I'm not going to do the 0 output. I'm going to start at the 1 output for this one because I don't want to divide by 0, because the formula here is, again, equal. It's my, again, the total fixed cost for 1 unit, which is a 200, right? I'm going to absolute this. No, I'm not going to absolute this. This one I'm not going to. I'm going to divide this by, of course, the 1. Right? The 200 divided by 1. That's the average fixed cost, right? And I copy it down. This should go, the average fixed cost should be 100 because 200 divided by 2 will come out to 100. And again, because I always want to divide by column A, always divide by the output. I'm just going to put a $sign here in front of the A. So it's B4 divided by $sign A4. It just makes my life easier with the absolute, because when I copy it to the next column, I'm going to copy this formula over to column F. I want to do C4, which is the total variable cost, divided by A4, again, the output. So here I got my 200. I'm going to throw it down. I'm going to check again number 5 at this 40. And yeah, it takes the 200 divided by 5, which comes out to, a quick escape gets me out of here, comes out to 40. So what I can do now is, because basically this is the same formula, the average variable cost takes the, again, this variable cost column in C divided by the 1. The total cost, average total cost, takes the what's in column D divided by, again, the 1. So I'm just going to highlight this whole average variable cost because I have the $sign in front of the column A. Just going to copy it over to the right. And then I'm going to take a quick check. I'm going to double click on the 220 here for the average variable cost. In column F, F8, I double click here, and yeah, it takes that 1,100, right, which is the total variable cost, divided by the 5 output. So when I'm making 5 output, my total variable cost is 1,100. To find the average for each unit of output, I take the total variable cost divided by the 5. And it comes out to 220. Same thing, I'm just going to double click on the 260 here. Again, it's got my D8 divided by $egg, and the $ makes this all possible to do one quick formula and copy it to the right, because I always want to divide by output in A. But I want the row to be variable, so it goes down, it goes up as I copy it down. And again, same thing, it takes the total cost divided by the output, right? 1,300 divided by 5. So there's my average total costs. The next column is one of our key ones. What's our marginal cost? This is fairly easy to understand. I want to see what it costs for the next additional unit sold. What's the difference between 0 output and 1 output? In total cost, right? I'm working with this column here basically. What's the difference? If I do it's 0 output, my total cost is 200, right? It's just my total fixed cost because I'm producing nothing, so there's no variable cost. So when I go from 0 to 1, what's the marginal cost? What's the cost for that 1 unit of product produced, right? I want to take the difference between these two numbers, the 480 and the 200. Marginal cost, very easy to figure out. I'm just going to do a simple formula, equal, because I want to see between 0 and 1. What's the marginal cost? I take the 480, that D4 minus the 200. Right? And if I copy this formula down, again, it'll just, because there's no absolutes with this one, it will give you the marginal cost when I copy it down to the next cell between 1 and 2. Right? Between the 700 and the 480, we'll see if that comes out to the correct number. So 280, that's correct, right? 480 minus 200, that's the marginal cost of going from 0 to 1 unit sold. Between 1 to 2, what's the difference between the 700 and 800? And again, if I just throw this thing all the way down, 220, right? So I double click there, yeah, it takes the 700 minus the 480. There's my marginal cost, right? Marginal. It's an easy term in a sense. What is the cost for the next units sold? You know, marginal cost basically goes down and then goes up. It's kind of a curve, as we'll see. We're going to graph all this stuff in a second. So the next we want to find out is the marginal revenue, right? And the marginal revenue, it's basically we sell this lumber at the same price. So the price here is this 300 that I got over here in M3. So my marginal revenue, again, how much for each additional unit sold, how much do I get in income? You know, each one costs 300 bucks, right? It doesn't change with output. So all I'm going to do is equal. I'm going to click on that cell M3 and I'm going to absolute the whole thing, right? If you're not using a Mac, use your F4 key. I'm using a Mac. I don't know what the key is. I probably should. And then just enter, right? So 300 all the way down. Fun. And then total revenue. Let's figure out total revenue. So let's do total revenue at 0 output, right? What is my total revenue? Total revenue is going to be my marginal revenue, which I have 0, right? If I'm doing no output, times, and then my output. Basically 0 times 0 is going to give us 0. But when we copy this formula down, again, for the next one, I'm going to go check on number 5 again, just to see if I got the right formula here. I'm double clicking here. Takes the 300. Again, that's what I sell for each unit is sold for 300 bucks a piece, times the 5, right? And that does give me 1,500, right? Which is 300 times 5. So profit. Here I'm going to do profit. Again, just keep an eye on these cell addresses. I want to do the profit if I sell nothing. Right? It's going to be an important cell in a second. So profit, of course, is going to be what I take in total revenue minus what I pay out in total costs. So total revenue at 0 output is, right, that cell there, I3. total revenue minus, again, total cost. And my total cost is over here in column D, correct? D3, make sure you be careful with these formulas. Enter that in, so I get a negative 200 profit, right? Which makes sense, because my overhead is 200. So if I'm producing nothing, I'm going to lose 200 bucks. So I'm just going to throw this thing down, and here I can see where I get the most profit, right? And then the key with, again, remember this for the test, please, where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, right here. Let me put a nice color. That's my profit maximization, right? It's very simple to understand, right? What does it cost me for the next additional unit to build it, right? So it's $300 the cost of the next one. If my marginal revenue is equal to my marginal cost, right? That is the profit maximization. If it costs me less, my marginal cost, if I look up here at the 220 and the 300, my marginal cost is less than my marginal revenue, I can build more, right? And still make profit because my marginal costs are less than my marginal revenue. Same thing down here. If my marginal costs are greater than my marginal revenue, costs greater than revenue, it's not a good idea. So where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, MR equals MC, this is your profit maximization we should be producing at this 7 output. Even though it's the same profit as you'll see with 6, but MR equals MC is the key. But things change. Let me take off my yellow. I got a competitor that comes into my life, and I've got to cut prices because this guy is cutting prices on me, taking my business away. So I'm going to sell for just $240, right? Notice I'm not making a profit at all. But if I look at where MR equals MC, where it's closest, the closest anyway, here is the closest right here. Here is where I'm just losing 100 bucks. Right? We're losing money, but we would still be in business, in the short run at least, because if we close down completely, we still got to pay 200 bucks, right? It's better to lose 100 bucks than it is to lose 200 bucks. So, but let's do this graphically. I'm going to put this back at 300. Please try to do this graph. It's a little tricky, but I want to do a quick graph and point this out like the textbook does. So I want to graph output first. So I'm clicking in A2, just one click. And then, because I don't want to graph starting at 0, it wouldn't look good. So I want to start graphing at 1. So here we get, it's difficult. You got to hold your control key down and then just highlight my outputs. And again, I also want to graph then not only this stuff, I want to do my average variable cost. So I'm clicking once there and then starting with my average variable cost. I'm also going to do my average total cost. One click here, click and drag down. Expect this not to work the first time you do this. Click on MC, drag down, click on MR, and then drag down. This is what I want to graph. And graphing here, once you have this, again, don't expect this to work the first time. You always have to do it 2 or 3 times. This is going to be a scatter. It's really an XY graph, right? And I'm going to choose this one here with the nice curvy lines on it, right? And there's my graph. And if you make it look like the book, I'm going to change by Y scaling, right? Everyone knows this is the Y scale on the left, so I'm just going to double click here on one of these Y numbers because I'm going to start my, instead of starting at 0, the origin, I'm going to start at what? 150. It'll look better. So I'm going to double click on my Y's. It's the first thing that comes up, the first choice, my axis options. Instead of automatically, I'm going to fix it myself at 150. These are things you do all the time, is graphing. And that's just going to close. And there's my nice graph. Oh, I love this graph. This is where you get to see the beauty of mathematics. So here, notice MC is the green line. Marginal cost goes down, and then it starts going up. And we're going to talk about this later in the semester, but you get specialization, you get economies of scale, costs go down, but then they start to climb after a while. Notice it'll always intersect, always, this is the beauty of math, the average variable cost and the average total cost right at their minimum points. Right? Always. We'll talk about that in class 2. But here's the key point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This is the key point, right? Where the green line here meets the MR. This is our important line, important point to look at. This is where we should be producing at. So here, let's just change our price and see how it affects the graph. Again, somebody comes in, they undercut me, so I got to go 240. Boom. I put that in. Notice now where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Sorry for me to grab it. Right here, I am below my average total costs, right? Again, where marginal revenue equals marginal costs. You know, you got to draw your eyes to that intersection here. Let me put in a little circle. Right here. Right? Let me change the color because it's so exciting. Not for you, I know. There's our marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Notice the point is above the variable costs. Again, that's why, again, if I shut down, I will be losing $100 more because this is my, at 5 output, my profit is minus 100. If I do 0 output, my profit is minus 200. I'm losing more money. So for the short run, you always keep going unless you get the case where this point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue is above the total cost. And that's when you shut down. So here, let's take a look. Some other guy comes in really undercutting. $200 a price. Right? Then notice where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. It is below both the average total cost and the average variable cost. Notice over here in column K where MR equals MC, and is right around here, unit 4 units sold, 280, it would be better, I would save myself $80 if I close down, right? Because I'm above my fixed costs. So take a look, try and do this one. This graph is hard to do. It'll take a couple times probably to do it. Sometimes if it looks really strange, here I'll point out what happens with graphs. If you click on the design, there's a choice to switch columns and rows. So if your graph looks like that, it looks kind of pretty. But if your graph looks like this, just go to this Chart Tools, Design, Switch Rows and Columns, and it will look like the textbook. But give this a try. See how it works. We'll talk about it Wednesday.